This is Geometry, Section 4.1, Congruent Figures. So, we've talked about congruent sides and congruent angles before. In this section, we're going to talk about what it means for two figures to be congruent. So, in this drawing right here, we've got triangle CAT and triangle DOG. And they appear to have all of their angles and all of their sides congruent to each other. So they appear to have congruent sides and congruent angles. So this is actually what congruent figures means. In order for two figures to be congruent, they have to have all sides and angles congruent. The ones that match up, that correspond to each other. So corresponding means, like I just said, the ones that match up. So corresponding angles for these two figures would be, well, angle B is 82 degrees, angle N is 82 degrees, so those angles would match up and be corresponding. So angle B and angle N, 30 here, 30 here, so angle Z and angle Y. And the third one, 68 here and 68 here, so angle R and angle F. Corresponding sides, same thing, we look for the same measurement. So this side right here is 15, that's side BZ. That matches up with this side right here, NY. This side is 8, BR. That matches up with this 8, NF. Last side is 16, ZR, and that matches up with 16, FY. Okay, so are the triangles congruent? Yes, because all sides and all angles are congruent. So to write that, we write that triangle BZR, and we can write this first one in any order that we want, but since I wrote it in this order, I have to match up the corresponding letters. So B goes with N, because those are both 82, Z goes with Y, those are both 30, and R goes with F, because those are both 68. So I have to write them in order. The order matters when I write this, which is called a congruence statement. So, given that my congruence statement here is triangle ABC is congruent to triangle SRT, we could switch the order of these two. So, if I switch the order of C and B, then I just switch the order of T and S right here. So this would be congruent to triangle RTS. Here, TSR, I wrote these backwards. So now I just have to write these backwards. So TSR would be congruent to triangle CBA. And SRT, so that's the second one, the first one, and then the third one. That would be second one, first one, and then the third one. So BAC. Triangle BAC. Now, to match up all of these, all we do is just look at this original statement, or we could look at any of these statements. So it says angle A matches up with or is congruent to what? Well, angle A is the first letter, angle R is the first letter, so those match up. Angle S is the second one, angle B is also the second one. C is the third one, T is the third one. AB now, segment AB, that's the first two letters here, so I match it up with the first two letters here, RS. ST, those are the second two letters, so I match it up with the second two letters, BC. CA, last letter and first letter, last letter, first letter, TR. So, given that these two triangles are congruent, DRF is congruent to LCW. Find out the measure of angle C. Well, angle C is in the middle, angle R is in the middle. It tells me that angle R right here is a right angle, so angle C right here must also be a right angle, 90 degrees. W is the last letter. F is the last letter. I don't know what either of those are yet, so let's see if we can use something else to figure that out. So let's see if we can figure out L. L is the first letter, matches up with D, which is the first letter. D is 44, so L is 44. W and F now, so we don't know what either of those are, but we do know that a triangle adds up to 180 degrees. So if I add 90 and 44, that gives me 134. And if I subtract that from 180 degrees, I'm left with 46 degrees for both of these third angles in the triangle. Okay, now WC. So W and C are the last and middle letter in this statement. So I need to match up the last and middle letter in this statement. So R and F. Our F is 20. so WC also has to be 20. LC, so LC is the first and second, DR is the first and second. It tells me DR is 21, so LC is 21. FD, first and last letter here are L and W. So LW, it says, is 29, so FD is also 29. Similar problem now, except we've got some variables thrown in. So we've got triangle FAR congruent to triangle COW. We've got to solve for X, Y, and Z. So X I've got here. This side right here, AR, is 2X plus 7. So AR are the second and third letters here. Those match up with O and W. So OW right here is 95 centimeters. So I know these two things have to be the same. They have to be congruent because they match up. They're corresponding. So I know that 2x plus 7 has to be equal to 95. So now I just solve this equation. Subtract 7. 95 minus 7 is 88. If that equals 2x, I divide by 2 to get x equals 44. Same thing for y. So y, I've got 2y minus 11 here for FR. F and R are the first and last letter. C and W are the first and last letter in the second triangle. So those two match up with 93. Same thing. 2y minus 11 equals that 93 centimeters, because these have to be the same. So I add 11. I get 104 equals 2y. When I divide by 2, I get y equals 52. Same thing for z. So z now is this angle. It's angle F. Well, F is the first letter. C is the first letter. It tells me angle C is 75 degrees. So I know 5z, that angle, has to be equal to angle C, which is 75 degrees. So 5z has to equal 75. When I divide by 5, I get that z equals 15. The third angles theorem. So in a triangle, we had a problem a couple problems ago. This problem right up here, where we had two of the angles, and we had two of the angles over here. So we had a 90 and a 44 in each triangle. We solved for the third angle by subtracting the sum of these two angles that we already had. So we added those together, got 134, subtracted from 180 to get 46. So this angle is 46. If I did the same thing over here, add these together, subtract, I would get the exact same thing for this angle over here. So the third angles theorem just says, if in two triangles, if you're given the first pair of angles is congruent, or are congruent, the second pair are also congruent, then the third pair must also be congruent. So just by default, if you have two pairs of congruent angles in a triangle, then the third angles automatically have to be congruent. Notice that there is no third sides theorem. This is not necessarily true for the sides of a triangle. It's only true for the angles, since the angles always add up to 180 degrees for a triangle. So find x. We've got these two angles with a double rainbow, this with a single rainbow, so we know those are congruent. Therefore, third angles theorem says these two angles have to be congruent to each other. So 3x plus 6 has to equal 42. So I subtract 6. 3x equals 36. When I divide by 3, I get x equals 12. So these angles are congruent because of the third angles theorem right there. Couple proofs. So, given that angle H is congruent to angle M, we need to prove that angle D is congruent to angle R. Well, if I look at the other pair of angles in this triangle, angle 1 and angle 2, I notice that those are vertical angles, so I can say those are congruent. 1 congruent to 2, because they are vertical angles, and I know vertical angles are congruent. Well, now I've got two pairs of angles that are congruent to each other, so angle D and angle R are the third angles in both of those triangles. So third angles theorem says that I can say those two are congruent to each other. So third angles theorem. Since I've already got two pairs in this triangle and this triangle that are congruent to each other, these two are automatically congruent. That's what the third angles theorem says. Next proof. I've got AM congruent to BM, so mark those congruent. XM, 2 marks, congruent to YM, and AX congruent to YB. So, I've also got AX is perpendicular to AB, So this would be a right angle right here. Those are perpendicular. These are also perpendicular. Okay, so angle 1 congruent to angle 2. Again, 1 and 2 are vertical angles. Vertical angles. Angle A congruent to angle B. Well, we said that those were both right angles since they're perpendicular. So we just say those are both right angles. That's why angle A and angle B are congruent. Angle X and angle Y congruent. Well, this is the third angles theorem. Because we already said the other two pairs are congruent. So this is the third angles theorem. It says that that third pair of angles is congruent by default. These triangles, AXM congruent to BYM. Well, we just said that all the angles and all the sides are congruent. All corresponding parts are congruent to each other. Since we said the 3 pairs of angles, 3 pairs of sides are congruent, that means the triangles are congruent to each other. In the next couple sections, we'll learn about how to prove that triangles are congruent without having to go through all of this stuff, without having to show that all 3 pairs and all 3 pairs of angles and all 3 pairs of sides are congruent to each other.